everyone. My heart is so filled this morning. Thank you so much for the incredibly generous introduction, Princess. Knowing that Princess is going to follow me in leadership makes me feel very, very confident in the future of this country. All protocols observed. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. As someone who loves this country with every fiber of my being, I feel very honored and privileged to address you today. When I think of Liberia's birth as a nation, I often picture fists of all shapes and sizes raised in the air like this. Because our Declaration of Independence on July 26, 1847 was a revolutionary act of defiance. Back then, when blackness was synonymous with bondage, we Liberians dared to be free. Inspired by our Haitian sisters and brothers who had led the first successful slave revolt in history, we dared to reclaim Black personhood. Decades later, when our beloved continent was being carved up in the European scramble for Africa, swallowed whole by colonialism, we dared to be sovereign. In fact, our very existence as Africa's first Black republic inspired a race benighted. Lest we forget, our Declaration of Defiance happened nearly a century before independence movements began in earnest across this very continent. So, Liberia's Independence Day should be called In Defiance Day. Because since you like that, I'm going to repeat it. Liberia's Independence Day should be called In Defiance Day. Because 177 years ago, our foremothers and fathers defied the odds. They attempted to prove that Black self-rule was not only possible, but also undeniable. They embraced Black internationalism long before this form of solidarity became an act of resistance. Our amalgam of different identities and cultures, West African, West Indian, Caribbean, Central African, and North American, was a radical affirmation of Africa meeting its diasporas. This exceptional legacy is our destiny. Yet, when we talk about ourselves today, in the narratives that we pass down from one generation to another, we tend to forget the magnitude of 1847. We forget that this glorious land of liberty was founded on abolitionist principles. We forget that dignity once defined us. Somehow, somewhere, some way, we lost touch with our common humanity. We created citizenship tiers based on ethnicity, class, gender, religion, and race. We mortgaged our resources to the highest bidder. We placed profits before people and planet. We silenced and suppressed dissent. We mistook autocracy for democracy. We failed to preserve and protect the that fill our hearts, enliven our souls, and sharpen our minds. And in the aftermath, we fought a brutal, protracted war that left death and destruction in their wake. And in the aftermath of such carnage, we achieved negative peace. The absence of direct physical violence, when we should have been pursuing positive peace. The absence of structural violence. Now, understandably, for many, July 26th symbolizes not defiance, but defeat. Not rupture and regeneration, but regression and retreat. Not inclusion, but exclusion. Not cooperation, but contestation. From 1847 onwards, our negotiations over land ownership, political participation, identity, and belonging yielded both productive and destructive outcomes. Our nearly 200-year history as a nation exposed both collaborative and combative elements of who we are. Despite adopting a unification and integration policy 1 century after independence, we never actually united against a common existential threat until the Ebola outbreak of 2014 to 2016. For the first time, in that moment, instead of attacking each other, we stepped into our collective purpose and showed that in union strong, success is sure. We cannot fail. We proved that what started out as a 19th century experiment in Black self-determination had grown into something larger than we could ever have imagined. In this, our 177th year, I urge us to reimagine what it means to be one nation, indivisible. Oh, how sweet this country could be if we only rebuilt it for all of us to enjoy. We must believe that there is sufficient space to accommodate our differences and our shared experiences, that there are enough resources to supply our basic needs and cultivate our God-given talents. And so, we must narrow wide gaps between the poor and the prosperous, between the powerless and the powerful, between women and men, girls and boys, young and old, rural and urban, domestic and diasporic. Every 26 should be a moment of reflection and reckoning. Have we dared to be defiant in the previous year? Have we treated each other with civility and not cruelty? Have we upheld high standards of accountability, and that includes respecting time? Have we reduced inequality and redistributed wealth to enable everyone to survive, not just merely survive? Have we reduced, I'm going to repeat that again, have we reduced inequality and redistributed wealth to enable everyone to thrive, not merely survive? Have we developed functioning systems that will outlive us? Have we taken full responsibility for our socio-economic transformation? My challenge to us on this Indefiant Day is to build back better. My challenge to us on this Indefiant Day is to build back differently. Now, I have traveled the length and breadth of Liberia's 15 counties and our 16th county of the diaspora. And one thing always rings true. Each and every one of us wants to live a life of dignity. Now, our methods of achieving self-respect and self-worth have not always been compatible, fair, or just. Yet we cannot build a new Liberia for all Liberians this year's 2016 until we all possess a basic level of well-being. Dignity must define us. This should be our creed, our mission, our vision, our roadmap, our North Star, our prayer, our central unifying core and ideal as a people. Dignity must define us. Those who came here yearn for dignity. Those who were already here yearn for dignity. Liberians at home and abroad currently yearn for dignity. Dignity must define us. I propose a radical agenda for achieving this very lofty goal. First, we must reconceptualize and redefine what it means to be a Liberian. What does it mean to be a citizen in this post-war moment? Second, we must tackle the twin development challenges of structural violence and unfreedoms. How do we enable all Liberians to realize their fullest potential? And third, we must prioritize nation building as much as we prioritize state building. How do we build relationships between individuals and institutions of government to serve the collective good? I have plenty ideas, but little time. So please give me a small chance, yeah? Reconceptualizing and redefining Liberian citizenship. In 2021, I published a book that investigates how Liberian citizenship has changed across space and time, and what implications this has for our development outcomes. I discovered that in the aftermath of any kind of upheaval or disorder, identities, practices, and relations between people fundamentally transform. From our founding as a nation state, to the indigenous wars of resistance, to the political rumblings of the 1970s, to the vile assassinations in 1980 and 1990 of two heads of state, which culminated in warfare, Liberian identities, practices, and interpersonal relations have fundamentally changed. Understanding why this change has occurred and how we cope with it now is the beginning of reimagining Liberia anew. So I used the unique backstories of the Liberians I interviewed at home and abroad in 5 cities, 5 countries, 3 continents to develop a framework for reconceptualizing and redefining what it means to be Liberian. I call it the Liberian citizenship triad. Shaped like a triangle, this triad has 3 points that move from the individual to how the individual interacts with her, his, government, and society. Point 1 on the triad defines Liberian citizenship as passive and identity-based. You are Liberian if you can claim birthplace and or bloodline ties to this country. This passive, identity-based form of citizenship is about claiming rights, regardless of your age, your gender, your ethnicity, your class, your sexual orientation, your ability, etc., etc., etc. Do you speak Liberian English and or a Liberian language? Do you identify with at least one of our counties as part of your lineage? Point 2 on the Liberian citizenship triad defines Liberian citizenship as active and practice-based. You are Liberian if you consistently, let me repeat that, you are Liberian if you consistently contribute to the country's socioeconomic transformation in big ways as well as in small ways. This active is about fulfilling responsibilities. Something that we often forget. Fulfilling responsibilities. Do you obey our laws, regardless of your stature? And I'm speaking here specifically here to some of you lawbreakers, lawmakers.
Are you willing to invest your time, your talent, and your treasure to build this nation? Lastly, point 3 on the triad defines Liberian citizenship as interactive, based on a set of relations between citizens and between citizens and the state. You are Liberian if you engage in healthy, I'm going to repeat the word, healthy interactions with other Liberians and with your government. Now, healthy interactions are defined as interactions that are neither abusive nor exploitative. This interactive, relationship-based form of citizenship is about building bonds. Do you hold yourself, your fellow citizen, and your government accountable? Do you offer constructive criticism when necessary and appropriate in ways that are not self-serving? These are the hallmarks of building a new Liberia for all Liberians. So, a reimagined Liberia is one in which we claim rights, we fulfill responsibilities, and we cultivate and maintain wholesome relationships with one another. Now, we can implement this Liberian citizenship triad by incorporating formal lessons about citizenship into our national curricula at all levels. By implementing a national youth service scheme to send graduating high school seniors who opt out of university to the county for on-the-job training in the private, public, and humanitarian sectors. And by requiring anyone who assumes public office, whether appointed or elected, to undergo mandatory civics training. For elected officials, a prerequisite for national certification should be assets declaration and at least 10 hours of civic education. Appointed officials should complete training within 2 weeks of confirmation. Dignity must define us. I want you to repeat that phrase. Dignity must define us. Let's try that again. Dignity must define us. Tackling structural violence and unfreedoms. Now, for critical development scholars like myself, the main goal of development is to enhance well-being and reduce deprivation. Yet structural violence and unfreedoms, which involve institutions and structures that fuel inequality and injustice, inhibit individuals from meeting their basic needs or actualizing their fullest capabilities. Though less visible than physical violence, structural violence is systemic, enduring, and ultimately more dangerous. Indeed, the true test of a nation is its willingness to transform the structural conditions that render so many of its citizens hopeless and hapless. A reimagined Liberia intentionally seeks to reduce the unfreedom of poverty and the inequity of structural violence. Because the contrast between our haves and our have-nots is entirely too stark in this country. For example, over 50% of Liberians live in multi-dimensional poverty. This is not only unacceptable, but needless for a country that can boast of 177 years of sovereignty. education for all. A reimagined Liberia rejects anti-intellectualism, develops critical thinking skills, and invests in lifelong learning from cradle to grave. When I worked in government over a decade ago, I can't believe it's been that long, we developed a capacity building strategy that aligns with our development needs. So, in addition to educating geologists and engineers and epidemiologists in our universities, we also focused on training electricians and carpenters and plumbers in our technical and vocational education institutes. This is a model worth replicating. Because everyone doesn't need to attend university to contribute to structural transformation. Having said that, as an assistant professor at the London School of Economics, I must stress that a reimagined Liberia requires an autonomous tertiary education sector that is fit for purpose. I must also insist that we shift our attention away from the extractive industries, which make us vulnerable to the vagaries of global capitalism, and instead focus on developing our creative industries. Why not empower our cultural and creative entrepreneurs so that the work of craftspeople, writers, musicians, visual artists, actors, designers, dancers is valued, protected through our copyright laws, and fairly compensated? Now this brings me to Liberia's very extreme levels of income inequality. The unregulated accumulation of vast wealth amidst cumulative want in this country is not only obscene and callous, it is structurally violent. Lawmakers, I urge you, I implore you, I appeal to you to revise our decent work bill. Change the monthly minimum wage from $143, which is unconscionable. What can you possibly do with $143 a month? Change the monthly minimum wage from $143 to at least $250 United States dollars. And reverse Liberia's so-called harmonization policy. Because a country that pays its average worker below average salary is setting itself up for failure. In Washington, D.C. in the United States, my humble and hardworking parents, my father's in the audience today, thank you, Dad, my humble and hardworking parents constantly reminded me that diligence and tenacity would be my ticket out of legal limbo. They were right. But how many of us actually value hard work? Some of us want jobs, but refuse to put in the time and effort required to support and maintain a career. When given
and propel our labor markets into the next century. We must also enforce the Liberianization policy by protecting Liberian businesses from the monopoly of foreign cartels. For example, because we import more than 80% of our food, including the staple rice, preference for government contracts should be given to Liberian agribusiness operating at scale. This will promote food security in keeping with the Liberians Feed Yourself program. See, President Meajai, I have read the documents. However, protectionist policies should never give us license to lower our standards or accept mediocrity. Liberians must constantly invent new ways to expand market outcomes and play an active role in our economy. Because the display of talent I saw at our Made in Liberia trade fair in Monrovia last Saturday completely blew me away. We are a resilient nation of gifted people who are beginning to dream beyond the realm of possibility. I urge Liberian entrepreneurs to see the heaps of trash dotted across our country as a business opportunity. See the regeneration of renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal, biofuel as an impetus for confronting the climate crisis. See the supply of clean, potable water as a business opportunity. See advancements in technology and artificial intelligence as an opportunity to produce jobs for the future. These pursuits will create sustainable employment, reduce intergenerational poverty, and spur economic growth. But our goal must be inclusive growth, not growth by any means necessary. And if inclusive growth is our mission, then we must cancel contracts with poorly performing multinationals and renegotiate concession agreements that violate our Liberian laws, including our labor laws and our international human rights standards, including environmental governance. These agreements must be amended in consultation with affected communities and should yield improvements in tax collection. We must leverage increased domestic resource mobilization from these revised concessions to pay off internal and international debt and clear our arrears with regional institutions that we actually founded, such as the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, and the Mono River Union. On the domestic front, we must lead a values-based revolution against corruption. We must lead a values-based revolution against corruption. Now, my two anti-corruption children's books were written for this reason. That is, to equip children with the verbal tools to question the confusing ethical codes of the adults in their lives and to model accountability, to become an example to us when it should be the other way around. Now, we do not need to reinvent the wheel, but we can be innovative in our advocacy of integrity. Liberia has a triple heritage of faith traditions. So what do African metaphysics, Islam, and Christianity have to teach us about breed and graft? How do they address Baba, the title of my first
which loosely translates into Bassa as lying, cheating, stealing. How do they promote Chargé, the title of my sequel, which means honesty, truthfulness, transparency? Because corruption is not just rampant in the public and the private sectors. It is enmeshed in our everyday human interactions. It is enmeshed in our everyday human interactions. We even use coded language or other euphemisms to conceal our misdeeds. Cold water, gato, flexibility fees. My favorite, they're going to see and I said me. We often point the finger at our government, failing to realize that corruption begins in the home, that corruption begins in the community, that corruption is a function of both poverty and greed, and that a corrupt regime is a reflection of a corrupt society. So, while modifying our values from top to bottom, bottom to top, we must enforce already sound laws while building additional safeguards to curb corruption. We must strengthen judicial bodies and integrity institutions by populating them with impartial patriots. Name and shame those found guilty of evading public trust. Force them to restitute stolen funds and resources. And then send them to jail. High-level corruption, in particular, I'm going to repeat this because I want you to remember it. High-level corruption, in particular, is like mass murder. And we must treat it like the egregious crime that it is. Because the rule of law is not some fashionable accessory we put on when it suits us. It is the protective armor that we must wear every single day in our values-based revolution. Now, in addition to prosecuting people in the soon-to-be-established National Anti-Corruption Court, we must also remove corruption-inducing expenditure from our national budget, such that inflated salaries for elected and appointed officials, imported vehicles, fuel and scratch card allotments can be completely done away with. These funds should be reallocated to incentivize doctors and nurses and teachers and police officers who serve under-resourced regions of this country. All government agencies must be audited, and elected and appointed officials should declare their assets for public scrutiny as a requirement for assuming office. On the international affairs front, we must not allow foreign financiers to hijack our development process. We cannot and will not build a new Liberia for all Liberians if we blindly pander to the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and their proxies in the United Nations. These neoliberal institutions are not committed to the radical transformation required to reimagine Liberia. Moreover, our socio-economic transformation must be internally driven, not externally imposed. So, a reimagined Liberia reduces poverty and inequality, yes, but it also redistributes
distributes wealth, invests domestic resources into basic social services, protects land and labor in the midst of capitalist reintegration, and expands prosperity for all. This is how we address structural violence and unfreedoms head on. Dignity must define us. Dignity must define us. Prioritizing nation building and structural and state building. For the last 2 decades, Liberia has focused almost exclusively on state building at the expense of nation building. Yet one cannot succeed without the other. Whereas state building concerns strengthening government institutions, such as policies, laws, courts, and legislatures, nation building is about improving the relationships that govern our lives. While nation building is people-centric and internally driven, requiring national agency, ownership, and resources, state building is institution-centric and often externally supported with international resources. Whereas state building focuses on building physical infrastructure, which is very important, so our roads, our bridges, our ports, our electricity. Nation building focuses on building human infrastructure. That is, the psychosocial, emotional, mental, and communal well-being of citizens. State building lifts Liberia by improving the government's ability to provide privileges and protections. Nation building lifts Liberians by enabling citizens to demand representation, rights, and resources while also fulfilling responsibilities. Now, 20 years in the making, our recent progress on establishing a war and economic crimes court is a welcome convergence of nation building and state building. Because the arc of a reimagined Liberia bends towards justice. Because the arc of a reimagined Liberia bends towards justice. In our bid to achieve positive peace, we cannot afford to bungle this process. We must be the chief sponsor and architect of this court, including providing the lion's share of financing for it. We must institute a transparent and merit-based process of selecting who shapes the court's mandate. And we, with apparently no civil society vetting or endorsement. This is unacceptable. President Meajai, I urge you to withdraw this nomination and not allow politicking to derail one of the most important appointments of your time in office. Staff this office with outstanding human rights defenders, many of whom have been advocating in the trenches for decades. Finally, I remain very concerned about the outsized influence of the United States in our transitional justice process. We must forge new strategic partnerships based on mutual benefits and disabuse ourselves of the notion that we have a special relationship with America. Truth be told, this special relationship only exists in our imagination. We forget. Lest we forget. The United States was one of the last countries to recognize our love of liberty united us here. As suggested by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission final report. Why are we still calling our highest honor, our highest national honor, the most venerable order of knighthood of the pioneers of the Republic of Liberia? When the word pioneers remains politically charged, how could renaming our capital Monrovia help to decolonize us? By refashioning our flag, our seal, our national anthem, our national awards, among others, we can reimagine a Liberia based on a set of ideals that we all oppose. We should establish a committee of Liberian scholars, local government officials, cultural experts, and visual artists to devise new symbols of national relevance that will culminate in a referendum. We must also adopt one of Liberia's most widely spoken languages as our national language. And embrace Liberian English as our lingua franca. Now, this does not negate the need to master standard English. Instead, it promotes multilingualism as a form of nationalism. Because our norms and traditions are fluid rather than fixed, we must understand that the dichotomy between indigenous and settler, domestic and diasporic, is false. One thing that unites us all is our shared history of migration. Now, some of us are more recent migrants than others. For example, most of Liberia's 16 ethno-linguistic groups are not indigenous. They actually migrated in several waves from the 12th century onwards. By the time free and formerly enslaved blacks arrived on the coast of pre-settler Liberia in the mid-19th century, 250 years of migration had preceded them. So, our shared historical narrative must be that we are all immigrants. None of us belongs to this country more than the other. Dignity must define us. Let me hear it again. Dignity must define us. Don't worry, I'm wrapping up. In our efforts to achieve state building, we must build a national consensus around how we perceive and perform public service. While some people enter government to engage in post-war profiteering, others are committed to transformational public sector productivity. Not everyone who joins government to steal. While some remain political entrepreneurs, others become transformational policymakers. This duality exists in governments across the world. We have to do a better job of not only scouting for competence, but also gauging who will put public interest before personal gain. This is what the Liberian elected. This is what the Liberian electorate communicated when we rejected most incumbents